certainly at a higher level, what we're seeing is a standardisation across Victoria. So previously you might have had some different controls in different suburbs, different councils. We are now going to be standard across Victoria. What we'll find though, and the important change, is that if you can meet these standards, and they're very much prescriptive, so they're not open to interpretation by objectors or council, if you can meet those standards, you'll go through a much more streamlined process. But importantly, a lot of the things that we've argued about over a number of years, such as neighbourhood character, how big is my upstairs allowed to be? What sort of style should my house be? Those sorts of things actually go out the window. And we've now got a very different system with dealing with those, which provides more flexibility for developers.
If you're putting your developer cap on, what do you think the biggest advantage is?
For the developer who's prepared to think outside the square, I think smaller sites have the opportunity now to create a much better development yield than what you had previously.
Welcome back to the Development Tank. Pumped for today, the long-awaited town planning codes, regulations that have all been changed and have all been free kick developer here in Victoria. So we've got Dan Bowden from Song Bowden Planners here, dominant town planners in the state of Victoria and probably Australia. He probably goes further. But super pumped to speak to him. I've got Gavin by my side here. Claire's not here, couldn't make it, but we'll do another one with her. But Gav's here, and we're going to go deep on all things town planning in Victoria and assess where the opportunities are. So make sure you like, share, subscribe. Remember, if you're looking to do a knockdown rebuild, dual occupancy or multi-unit development site, click in the consultation below, get across to Instagram, come say hello, Bonnie. We've turned it on. Lots of day-to-day happenings over there. And make sure you get in the Little Fish Network, littlefishnetwork.com.au. Plenty of questions getting asked in there and answered. All right, guys, let's get into it. Dan, thanks for coming.
All right, thanks for having me, Pete. Appreciate it.
Gav, you're a bit excited here, I think.
I am, yeah. Look, we've been sort of ramping this up a little bit over the last few episodes, and as the changes have been trickling through, we've been getting more excited. But there's so many questions, so
hopefully I've got some answers for you.
No one better to have here to work through them with.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, Dan, do you want to just tell the audience a little bit about your career? We've known each other for a while now, but you've spent some time working in council, and now you've got your private practice. But do you want to give us a little wrap of yourself, mate?
No, thanks, Pete. I started back in last century now, which sounds weird to say. So I was a council planner at the city of Box Hill and Whitehorse, then did some time also at City of Maribyrnong. Yeah. So that was until 2002. And then for the last 20 odd years, I've had my own practice, and that's been based here in Victoria. And we really work Victoria-wide, so specialising in the sort of things we're going to talk about today, which is dual occupancies, multi-dwellings, mainly, but predominantly residential development. So, I'm really excited about these new changes, some really positive steps forward for developers, and, hopefully some good opportunities to see some better housing opportunities in the state.
Yeah, awesome, Dan, because the more and more we got drip-fed it, and your team come in a few weeks ago now, and that was all very exciting. And obviously we look at a lot of development sites for people, for our investors, for ourselves, and just excited by the way that, whether it be your front setbacks, your sort of your upstairs setbacks, these sorts of things. Yeah. So, mate, where do we start? Where do we get into it? And can you maybe start high level for us? Some people out there are a little bit across it, but majority probably don't know much about it, because I feel like we've just found out about it. Yep. So maybe start high level on the things that are changing, and then Gav and I can probably pick apart and really bring it into the Little Fish, through a Little Fish lens of the opportunities that we're excited about.
Yeah, no, sure thing. So I think from a starting point, we're talking about, it's clause 55. So it's multi-unit developments. So that excludes clause 54, which is single houses, and that's going to come later in the month, hopefully. Okay.
So that's going to be another episode down the track, but now we're multi-unit.
Yeah, so sticking with your two and up to a number of townhouses, 3-storey apartments as well included. But certainly at a higher level, what we're seeing is a standardisation across Victoria. So previously you might have had some different controls in different suburbs, different councils. We are now going to be standard across Victoria. So a standard set of rules that will apply everywhere, and that's going to provide some more certainty as well. What we'll find though, and the important change, is that if you can meet these standards, and they're very much prescriptive, so they're not open to interpretation by objectors or council. If you can meet those standards, you'll go through a much more streamlined process where there'll still be some notification to adjoining properties, but that will have some implications as to what things objectors can and can't say. But importantly, a lot of the things that we've argued about over a number of years, such as neighbourhood character, how big is my upstairs allowed to be, what sort of style should my house be, those sorts of things actually go out the window. And we've now got a very different system with dealing with those, which provides more flexibility for developers and less ability for councils to influence those items. So some real positive aspects there. So in a general sense, what I'd say is that we're moving towards a tick the box system. And if you can tick those boxes and demonstrate that you comply with each of those requirements, you'll go through a much quicker and more certain process. And that's got to be a good thing for not only supply of housing, which from a town planner's point of view, we're looking to increase here in Victoria, but also then opportunities for developers who have got sites or looking at buying sites, providing more certainty about what they can certainly achieve.
Yeah, how good's that? So you've had, obviously in the past, we've had municipalities with their own sort of set of policies that, this municipality, we contact yourself, go, hey, we're looking at a site, and it's like, hey, remember we're in this area, guys, and these things apply, and it's like, oh, okay, that site doesn't work anymore. You're saying that's gone, and as long as you stay within the tick box system,
absolutely, yeah,
the consistency is going to be there.
And that certainly has been something I know from when we've had discussions from our team to your team about what do we say about this site, and often it might have been in certain areas like, oh, I don't think this is the sort of area where you can achieve that outcome. That goes away. With this standardised process now of same site coverage if you're in the same zone, and those local variations that previously would have set the bar higher, they've gone, and that's a really big change. So now,
in one of our safe suburb or safe municipalities, you want to call it that, say Glen Ira.
Yes.
If we've got a 650 square block, standard frontage, and we're going to put a dual lock on it, and we tick all the boxes for that design, we could then take that same design to any other council area, Banyule, Bayside, Monash, and more or less have a walk-up start.
Correct. The only thing that would change that is the orientation of the site. So different sites with different orientations have some different setback requirements. But in theory, Gav, the things that you've been able to achieve on that block should pretty much translate across to other sites where, a good example, those councils that you just mentioned, some had a 4 metre rear setback, some had a reduced site coverage. They've all been standardised, and that gives more flexibility in addition to those things like council can't have a say in the style of the sort of house that you want. So Monash, for example, previously was very much anti-Georgian style. There's no indication that they can provide any comments or have any influence on the style of development that you want to do. And for a lot of people, that's a really positive change.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was thinking that before when you raised it, and I was thinking about just facades. So I know some councils, like even in Hobson's Bay, back when I've done a couple of projects there, it was all about pitch roofs. There was an older gentleman there on the team who'd been running it for years, and he was a real stickler for it. So
exactly.
That just doesn't take place anymore.
And a lot of councils were averse to a flat roof form, particularly in a street where you had a lot of pitched roofs. You can do a flat roof form now, and you don't have to justify that to the council, provided you can meet those, tick those boxes of height, setback, site coverage, garden area, tree canopy cover and the like. So there's still a lot of requirements that you need to meet, but where the initial ones that we've looked at, we're not seeing many sites where you can't achieve those requirements with the sorts of outcomes that people were wanting to see on, say, a 650 square metre block.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's the thing. So Gav and I have the conversations of, the areas that we're more dominant, as you know, sort of Glen Ira and Bayside, we do a fair bit. Obviously Bayside, we had to have a good handle on how big the site needed to be, because of some of those, I guess, probably more onerous requirements there in Bayside versus a Glen Ira,
gone away now,
which have gone away. So for us, like Gav alluded to, the opportunities in these areas that now, these items have gone away. It's going to be quite refreshing.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key will be finding sites that don't have overlays. So, for example, I think at Bayside that you used the example. Bayside has a lot of areas that have got vegetation protection overlays
Yeah.
and or flooding overlays, heritage overlays. They'll still influence development. So
Yeah.
they're the ones that, whilst you'll meet those res code requirements and tick those boxes,
Yeah.
council will still require you to meet those overlay requirements. So sites that are free of overlays,
Yeah.
that have got sufficient size to be able to meet those standard requirements now that are part of Clause 55 are going to be really valuable sites where you can really, I think, at the feasibility stage, I'm looking at you, Gav, because I know that's your sweet spot, really provide some opportunity to really bed down the types of timeframes and the types of outcomes with some more certainty than we've ever been able to do in the last, probably before ResCode, back into the Good Design Guide and other iterations of what has controlled planning in Victoria.
Yeah.
This is a real game changer for those sorts of
So
developments.
what about neighbourhood character overlays?
So there hasn't been many neighbourhood character overlays in inner city Melbourne. There's certainly examples. For example, in Stonington, there's examples of the character overlay. If they apply, they would certainly take precedence over Clause 55. So if you're in a character overlay, the benefits that you get from this new system of avoiding the character consideration comes back in. So a site in a neighbourhood character overlay will still need to look at responding appropriately to character.
So with the overlays, Dan, like you said, you might have landscape, you might have heritage, your special building overlay with the sort of flooding and
They're your common
inundation.
ones, yeah.
They're your common ones. Are they still governed in the same, in the same manner, I suppose? So something with a landscape overlay that used to slow you down last time, is it
Yeah.
the same thing? Or do council have a few extra levers that they can sort of get you on if you have got an overlay?
Yeah, it'll be business as usual for those considerations.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the things that we've always had to deal with, and design and development overlays, another
Yeah.
one that we often
Yeah.
see where
Yeah.
council has a particular vision for the sorts of things they want to see there.
Yeah.
They still apply, and you'll still need to meet those requirements. So
Gotcha.
again, the sites that are free of these overlays are going to be much more desirable.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I think the important thing here is I don't think councils will use as an opportunity to make you pay or make your life hard for you. They'll
Yeah.
just still apply those overlays as they've always applied,
Okay.
and their consideration will be limited to those overlays. So,
Yeah.
in other words, if you can still tick all those boxes of Clause 55,
Yeah.
the only thing the council will consider will be in a SBO the flooding
And then it'll
issues.
go to Melbourne Water.
Yeah,
and
exactly. Or if you meet all of those Clause 55 requirements, but you're in a significant landscape overlay, they'll still consider the trees, but they'll only be considering the trees.
Yeah, so it's still looking at them as we would look at them.
Yep.
Significant landscape, vegetation overlay. If you're in a vegetation overlay, but you've got a clear site,
Yeah,
well, the overlay still boils down to not much.
exactly right.
Yeah.
So case by case
Yeah.
is a good example. And,
Yeah.
flooding overlays, there's some sites that are in a flooding overlay that doesn't have much of an influence, and there's other times where it will have a lot of influence in terms of the style or the size or the layout of your units, where Melbourne Water might not let you build from both side boundaries.
Yes.
And they're the sorts of considerations that have always been there and will continue to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, great, Dan. So let's talk. Obviously, we haven't ran the course on too many of these, cradle to grave, obviously, because it's so fresh. But what are you anticipating from a timing point of view? Like, it does sound like timing will come back in underneath us a little bit.
I'd expect there to be some significant improvements in timing.
Yeah.
I think you'll still get variations across councils, and that will depend on how well resourced they are.
Yeah.
But I think certainly if you can use that front end time to make sure that your development ticks all of the boxes,
Yeah.
you can go into council with some certainty, knowing that there doesn't really need to be a lot of change that's required, because council can't ask for change if you're meeting all of those requirements. So
Yes.
getting an application that's well put together, meets all those requirements, provides all the other materials such as ESD requirements, good quality landscape plan. You'll save a lot of time there, but you should also save a lot of time because council doesn't need to do the same assessment that it did. It still needs to make sure it meets all the requirements, but there'll be less back and forth about some of those items that we've often considered, such as neighbourhood character or does the upper level need to be that large? Should
Less-
we pull
less
back
speculation
in?
on
Those
things.
sort of
Yeah.
considerations go out when you're in a situation of just Clause 55.
And we still have to go through the advertising process.
Yeah, that's a really unusual one in that it's you still need to advertise, But if you were to meet all of those requirements, there's very little that a neighbour could actually say in that objection that would influence the ultimate decision from council. Because if you're meeting that requirement, there's no obligation for you to go further. So it's quite an unusual situation that we've still got objectors still being involved in the process. It might still well be that an objector raises an issue that a developer wants to take on board, such as increasing the height of a fence or bearing some landscaping requirements, but there'll be more certainty again that if you meet those requirements, you don't really need to be changing things for objectors if you have ticked that box.
Yeah, right. And that's something we've got a fair bit of certainty on, is that the process is still there. The objectors still have a voice.
They do.
But no one needs to listen.
Yeah, and there's still a bit to play out here. So, for example, councils have always had a situation where the number of objections has dictated whether a matter goes to a council meeting or not. We still don't know how each council is going to deal with those items. But what we do know is if you, again, ticking those boxes, an objector can't take you to VCAT if you can meet those requirements. So there should be some time savings there for that situation where a neighbour's unhappy and then decides to take you to VCAT.
And just, I mean, we talk a lot about dual locks here and, doing 3, maybe 4 or 5 on a corner or something like that.
Yeah.
But this also applies for, 3 stories, townhouse stacks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
How far does it go?
Yeah, so 3 stories really is the limit of what you would apply this to. Yeah. So it can be an apartment style in 3 stories, obviously, or rows of townhouses. But there's certainly some efficiencies of the higher site coverages. There's different setback requirements that you can apply now. There's effectively 2 types. You can apply the old res code barn or envelope that sets back as you get higher, or you can come in further and go straight up. So there's different requirements there now that allow for those different types of developments.
Yeah, right. It's exciting for, I guess, developers to have a broader portfolio of projects.
Or previously, council might have said, we think you've got too many units on this site. If you can tick the boxes and achieve the number of townhouses that you want, then council can't prevent you from doing those types of outcomes. And that's a real positive, I think, for particularly some developers might prefer to put a lot of smaller units on. Others might prefer to put less units and make them larger, and that will be depending on the suburb or the municipality and what your strategy is. But there's certainly flexibility if you did want to put the most number of units on there, provided you can tick those boxes, you'll be able to achieve that outcome.
As I'm listening to this, I'm thinking that councils might be a bit welcoming to it, unless they're, maybe those, real sort of, heroes in the area that like to do what they like to do. But I feel like having quite a streamlined process, and, you always hear they're understaffed and this sort of thing. I feel like they're going to be able to chew through their applications a bit quicker. Is this what you're hearing from your
look,
people?
I think there's still a bit of time for feeling out how these items apply. There are certainly some aspects in speaking to certain councils where they're really feeling their way, as are a lot of consultants such as myself, and trying to understand what level of documentation is required. But that's not unusual when you've had such a significant change. So I think once we get through that period of a good understanding about what's required and then what the expectations are of council, things will probably speed up as as time goes by. But yeah, certainly I think to get back to your point, Pete, the council planners really, I think will have a slightly different job now, where previously they might have been able to look into some of their neighbourhood character policies, which are a really big part of a lot of planning schemes throughout Melbourne, where in certain suburbs they might want weatherboard and other areas they might want particular roof pitches and the like. There will be less of that when you've ticked those boxes. Yeah,
I'm thinking out aloud there, but that area through Hobson's Bay that had the cream brick and all that, which in my opinion was just a mess, what they were trying to achieve there. But now something like that would be ignored.
Exactly. So there's more flexibility for if you're wanting to build some townhouses, want to live in one, and you say that's the style I want. There's nothing preventing you getting that, provided you can meet those neighbourhood character requirements and demonstrate that you've met them. That will be a much quicker process.
And the government, this is their policy, and they're pushing it through. So that's where the buck stops, isn't it?
It is, and it's a bold change. It's a change that I think is taken a lot of effort, and full credit to them. I think the changes we're starting to see in the last month since they've really come into fruition, a lot of developers turn around and start exploring sites that haven't stacked up previously, and if we're about trying to provide more houses for more Victorians, I think we're starting to see the initial response by developers to provide that as a really positive way to respond.
From what I'm seeing, it's not just providing the opportunity to create more yield, but it's also the opportunity to provide, as you say, potentially bigger dwellings in certain areas where it suits. So not only a developer may be able to get a better yield and a better profit, but also potential buyers are also going to have maybe better product to choose from.
Exactly right. I think that it's going to be more market driven, isn't it? Where previously councils might have prevented the types of outcomes that developers wanted to achieve, there's going to be more opportunity to achieve an outcome that the developer wants.
Yeah, right.
So Dan, the drivers of this from the government, we're talking about housing supply. Is it bringing the private developers back to the aisles, or ticking that box at least? There's a few other things. Building costs are still holding some back.
Yes.
And these sorts of things, and the real estate market. But, what are the drivers for a government to make these massive changes? Because like you said, they are massive. There's some areas that are 40% site coverage. They now go to 60%. Like you said, we've still got our garden open space, which, you smack up against that ceiling, but still 40 to maybe 55%, still massive.
Yeah, and I think that opportunity to get, in some cases, an extra 5 or 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but it could be that extra bedroom on the ground floor or the extra rumpus room upstairs that then brings a different typology of housing that will appeal to different markets. And I think that certainly has been one of the drivers behind the state government bringing in these controls. But I think there's a lot of other factors at play, as you've touched on: cost of money, cost of materials. But I think the last few years that we've seen that developers have probably gone into hibernation, waiting for things to change, whether it's a factor of a number of different elements. But we certainly see these changes that the government's brought through as a shot in the arm. And as I've indicated, we're already seeing developers come back to us on sites that, even some that have previously had permits, opportunities to do more with that original permit. And that's, again, a good sign.
Now it stacks up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of those ones weren't stacking up over the last few years for a number of other reasons other than planning controls, but certainly the change in planning controls has the ability to improve some of those other items.
Yeah, I think on here we talk about we've spoken about build prices as they've sort of dragged up over the journey. Obviously, flat real estate market, property taxes, all these sorts of things have led to probably some people shelving their jobs, and we deal with investors that invest across a lot of sectors, and property is one of them. But in recent times, there's probably a few that, for good reason, have gone, hey, I can get X amount over here, I'm going to go over here.
Correct.
But what we're seeing now is building prices probably easing. We feel like they maybe peaked halfway through last year.
And that's what we're hearing as well.
Yeah.
We're just not seeing the same increases that we were for a number of years.
Correct,
month on month. They seem to be stabilising.
Yeah, we've definitely found some of our recent competitive build tenders have sort of come in at a price, and then through competition and negotiation, they've been able to sort of come down. And probably with a lack of work out there as well, and builders really motivated to get that price more competitive. We're definitely sort of seeing them just come off. We're not getting that excited, but it's we've had an inflection point there somewhere that is in our favour.
And as we work through what these new changes mean, I think those sort of feasibility questions about, like, I think of a 2-story townhouse where previously councils always wanted that upper level to be recessed.
Yeah.
And from a cost point of view, that's additional steel, a lot of other elements that's only going to add to the price. I think there'll be opportunities to avoid some of those costs of what the build often is forced to take on as a result of some of that planning influence.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be there might be large savings, but in the combination of other factors about being able to provide a bigger house, a more cost-effective house, hopefully that will improve the feasibility.
Yeah.
Definitely all adds up, that's for sure.
Definitely, yeah.
Considering how tight things are at the moment.
Yes.
Maybe what we should do is just touch on some of the key changes. If we just take an example, and we've got a lot of people in our network that have done our course online,
Yep.
that have maybe wanting to start their first development or, 2 or 3 in, and they're still sort of finding their way on some items. So let's just maybe picture a 650 block and we're going to do a dual lock, right? So what are sort of, I guess, maybe the top 5 or so things or the items that have really changed that can improve a project of that sort of scale?
Great question, Gav. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, and coming back to what I said earlier about this being very much a standard item across Victoria now, is that some councils would have discouraged you from doing side-by-side. Others would have said...
Well, Monash is
a great example. I think Monash over the last few years have softened on that.
Little, but it's a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, but if we go back 15 or 20 years ago, very much side-by-side was discouraged in Monash. I think they've moved away from that. But the important thing is, under these new controls, if you can meet the requirements and they relate to the size of your frontage, as well as if there's any street trees, you need to have a certain separation from street trees. And if you're on a main road, you can only have one crossover. And so there's a lot of small elements that will often influence this. But in the main, a 650 square metre block, if that's in the order of, say, 16 metres or even the old-fashioned 15.24, you can do 2 crossovers. And council can't influence that if you can tick those boxes that relate to those items. And that's a really positive thing, in that sometimes people might have come to you with a feasibility and said, can I do side by side here? And you would say, well, possibly, but let's go and do a design, go and have a chat with the council, see what they say. Those days of needing to have that sort of dance with the council about can we or can't we do this, we can work that out much earlier in the piece, and there's more certainty and some time saving at that part of the process, notwithstanding those time savings that we might get during the process with council.
Yeah, and a lot of people have been aware of that, particularly with Monash. People come to us with properties in the area. And for a front to back design, which I see positives in that as well, no doubt. But for us to build a project like that, it probably costs us maybe 5% more. I'm guessing here, maybe 5 to 10% more, depending on your 2 single homes.
Sure, yeah.
So when things are tight, as we've discussed, that can be a bit of a deterrent. Just knowing that the side by side pretty much anywhere as a rule.
Absolutely.
Keeping in mind all the other factors. It definitely makes things a lot more easier.
And those little nuances that we talk about, like Monash being that way, Glen Ira is, I know, another one where there's you guys have had a lot of involvement with. Glen Ira always were very much about doing single garages, so that you had a room or some presentation to the street, where the regulations really provide the opportunity to do a double garage now. And in a market where you're trying to effectively compete with a family home, to now be able to provide that double garage with 4 bedrooms or above is certainly going to mean that I think some of the prices that were achieved previously will be able to be exceeded.
Ticks one of my boxes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Gav loves his double garage.
Yeah.
That's the really interesting one, because so on a 15.2 we can look at double garages.
Correct.
At that facing the street, and obviously that takes a bit of your ground floor plate away. But with the increased potentially site coverage, the reduced front setback, all these little things, like you said, the dwellings are going to be better opportunities for the end user, which hopefully drive prices a bit.
Exactly. And just on picking up on one of those points you mentioned before, Gav, 6 metres is your default setback. And
that's
quite
the next
often,
one I was going to say.
Yeah, and
that's one of my favourites.
And there's been
front yards a waste of space.
Plenty of times where we've had 8 and 9 metre setbacks, which has really constrained development in the back of the site. And I should say 6 metres will be the maximum. There'll be times when you'll get to 4 and 5. So there's some real improvements in terms of efficiency of what you can do on the rest of the site. So that's a huge change. I think that's probably one of the biggest changes. Your heights are pretty much the same, but I think one of the big changes is the amount of open space you need to do. So a lot of councils, and if we sort of stick on that Glen Ira theme at the moment, they previously wanted a rear setback of 4 metres and a larger area of open space like a lot of other councils do. And to pick Monash again for a second, you needed 75 square metres of open space. In theory, you're down to 25 square metres with a minimum dimension of 3. Now, the reality is when you provide some services and meet some of your landscaping requirements, I don't think you'll see a 5-bedroom townhouse with a 25 square metre courtyard. There'll be more area than that because you need to meet other requirements. But there is the opportunity to reduce areas of open space from what we've traditionally seen. And for some people, they may choose not to do that. They might still want the room for the lap pool or a larger area at the back. But if you did want to make it smaller, and Gab, to pick up on your point before, I think that brings in some smaller size sites that we traditionally wouldn't have looked at that might even be around the 450, 500 square metre size that will have an opportunity to do some redevelopment that probably didn't have before.
6 metres is great because that, let's just say, goes from 9 to 6 metres. That 3 metres just goes straight in the backyard.
Exactly.
If you're not going to put in any, might put part of it into the dwelling.
Yep.
But then you've just got a bigger backyard, which is what people really want.
And as we're sort of moving through these, so site coverage is now, if you call it 60% in neighbourhood residential zone, 65 in general, and 70 in a residential growth zone, to use those 3 standard residential zones. The reality is you probably won't get right to that because you've still got your 35% garden area. Now, of course, garden area doesn't apply in a residential growth zone, but you've still got to meet landscaping requirements, which will peg back that 70% site coverage that we're seeing in growth zones. So corner sites often are a bit more efficient. You'll get closer on a corner, but for your more standard blocks, I think if you see that you can now do 60, you probably won't get there. We're looking, you probably might get into the mid-50s, low 50s. But on sites, again, to use some councils like a Banyule, where they were at 40%.
Everywhere.
That extra 15% is a huge provides more flexibility to how you want to lay out your house, particularly at that lower level where we were seeing some very small footprints to try and restrict to 40%. You'll be able to expand and get that bedroom downstairs, which quite often you couldn't achieve.
It just makes for a better dwelling.
It should, yeah. It really should. And I think there'll be an onus on developers to still provide a quality product. And I think that's the industry's a little bit worried about some of those aspects. Are we going to see buildings that look like houseboats where you've just got the upper level that's the same as the lower level? But the market will decide this, won't it? And the different products I think will come through, and we'll see what works well.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the thing when you are dealing with a market that can make up its mind and can move from that product and go maybe buy a product somewhere else that is a bit more aesthetically pleasing. I feel like that, water will find its own level there.
And I think some more modern designs with flat roofs that handle shear walls well, probably we'll see a bit more of that as well.
Yeah, great. And that extra coverage is a bonus. I mean, I've looked at sites and, we might be squeezing a 27 square townhouse development onto a 600 or 620 block, might be south facing. So it just doesn't tick a lot of the boxes. But if we were to go to 52 or 55, all of a sudden we go from a really squishy sort of 4-bed or a weird shaped 3-bed into something that's a 4-bed home and comfortable, and you've got all the accommodation that you require.
Yeah, and for family type houses like that, just another point is that overlooking standards have changed. So if you've got upper level bedroom windows, they no longer need to be screened with the film or the old fashioned metal screen on the outside, the louvers.
So they're always a cost.
Yeah, exactly. Cost and I think also livability is one of
it's a bit jail cellish sometimes,
isn't it? Yeah, for sure.
And so the other one, I guess, it would be the setbacks, which in Bayside have always been really stringent and affected us not only with the sites that we choose, but the designs that we actually come up with in the end. And so that's another big change, isn't it?
I think Bayside will see some significant changes. We often refer to them in the industry as double setbacks. So the Bayside requirements were so much more onerous, and they really go back again to the default that will apply not only in Banyule, Burundara, Bayside, to use the B councils, it's standardised, and it would only be if you had a neighbourhood character overlay or other overlays that would influence those items. So, yeah, there'll be some greater opportunities for development in Bayside that you haven't had previously.
Yeah. I was looking at a townhouse development on the market at the moment, and it's in Hyatt, so it's Bayside, and just the upstairs bedrooms were 3 metres by 3.1, and it didn't look like they were just trying to squeeze more bedrooms into the house. It was just they were just so limited to what they could do on that land and with the side setback. So my opinion there is that it's, if we can go out a bit wider at the top level, then you're going to get 3.2s or 3.3 metre bedrooms, and all of a sudden you've just got better accommodation, you've got better living.
Exactly, and I should say, Gav, just to pick up on that point, one of the new standards that comes through that has always existed in the apartment standards is room sizes and living room sizes. So there are new requirements now for bedrooms to be of a certain size, and it's interesting that I think what the new changes that wanting to see is larger bedrooms, but what you're saying is that the market will probably provide those in the additional spaces that's been created by these changes. So but there is certainly a requirement in the planning scheme now for bedroom sizes and living rooms. I should make the distinction just from a technical point of view that's one of the standards that if you don't meet it, you don't need to go and advertise or avoid this issue of neighbours taking you to VCAT. There's some neighbourhood character standards, which are those height, setback and landscaping requirements, as to name a few, that you need to meet those to effectively restrict the types of things that council are talking about. Bedroom sizes is one of those standards that if you vary it, the council can only consider that issue of the item that you're varying, so they can't then go up and open up all your front setback requirements and the like.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Great.
Nice. So I guess, Dan, for you being if you were a developer, I know you develop, but if you're putting your developer cap on, what do you think the biggest advantage is, or the biggest thing that's flowing through an opportunity? Where does the opportunity lie?
Yeah, great question. I think, look, developers have always been territorial, haven't they? They stick to their areas. They have a particular product that they like. And I think sometimes council has influenced that product and reduced it down. I think there'll be the opportunity for people to provide the size townhouse that they want. Now, some developers like to put smaller, more price competitive townhouses in certain areas.
Yes.
Others, for example, in Brighton, aren't going to want to do a 2-bedroom product. It's going to be big and beautiful, and let's try and create a new street record here in terms of the price of return. So there'll always be those different approaches that developers have inherently had. But I think for the developer who's prepared to think outside the square and look at some sites, I think of some inner city sites around like a Footscray or some areas that those inner city areas like Collingwood or the like. Whilst you might not be able to meet all setback requirements in those smaller sites, I think smaller sites have the opportunity now to create a much better development yield than what you had previously. And I think that's where we're seeing some developers starting to look into those opportunities. And I think there's some great opportunities in those smaller sites that have traditionally been off the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So smaller sites, inner suburbs, which generally the sites get smaller, and doing multi-unit developments on them,
and not restricting yourself to 2. Think outside the square. And I think a lot of the new designers, designers are now getting their head around these new controls. They'll be able to say to you, I can fit 3 here that ticks all of these boxes, and that allows you that streamlined process. If you can establish that up front, it really helps your feasibility, doesn't it? In terms of, if I know I can get a permit for this inside a year, it's a huge change to the way we would have advised people. Where previously you might be able to do this, you might not. You might be taken to VCAT by council, you might be taken by the neighbour.
Especially those inner city suburbs that you mentioned. Just as soon as someone says, it's just like, we're going to get bashed. It's going to be a battle.
And they do cross our desk, and quite often I'll show Pete, say, look, this just looks really good, but then we just talk about the risk and the planning. You know what? It's just we could go and put that money into two
Yeah.
blocks over here where it's a lot safer, and we know we can get it through in a much shorter time. So yeah, it makes those sites look a lot more appealing.
But I should say, on the flip side, if you go out further to like a Knox or somewhere where there are 1,000 square metre blocks, I think there's some really good opportunities where previously councils might have said, this is a 3-unit site if you're lucky. You'll be able to fit 4 units on 1,000 square metres, and you'll be able to make them the size that you want, provided you can meet all of those tick the box items.
So there's the tree canopy percentage coverage, which is another factor that we need to take into consideration now.
Yep.
Is it 10% up to 1,000 square metres?
Exactly. So a good example is a site of 950 or 60 square metres might be more appealing than one that's 1,015 because you've got to provide that 20% of the site for canopy cover at over 1,000 square metres. So these are small amounts. It is. And it will be a significant change. But I think it's one of the ones that the government has said, well, you're getting some pretty good free kicks here in terms of the other items, but you're going to need to provide us some more trees. And I think there are going to be ways to meet these tree canopy requirements, but it's going to require a bit of finessing at the design stage to make sure you leave those areas where you can achieve the separation to provide a tree. So not just your 3 metres of your backyard, you're going to need more than that in certain areas. So but the other one, for example, is when you go over 10 townhouses, there's diversity requirements. So quite often a site that was larger, you might have wanted to say, well, I can put 12 townhouses on this site. There's going to be some additional implications for that. So again, every site will still have its own, little nuances about what you can and can't do, and its orientation will also indicate what it can and can't do, or where trees on adjoining properties, which has always been a factor. So you'll still need to, be agile and think about how best to deal with the site. But I think you should be always thinking that I can do more, and I can have more certainty about the outcome that I can achieve.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just understanding those thresholds, and like you say, a 10 site might be better than a 12 site, or even with the garden open space, feel like, maybe sub 650 slightly.
Exactly.
You might stay at the 30
Yep.
rather than 35. But yeah, just understanding and surrounding yourself with those people that can guide you in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, landscapers will be coming up to speed on the different types of trees that will work well. Architects and designers will be coming up to speed on the sorts of products that will work well with regard to these regulations, and town planners such as myself are often having questions coming through like, can I do cantilevers to avoid garden area? And the answer is yes, you can. So there's lots of things that I think will slowly find their way into the way in which people design things, and then there'll be also different ways in which council will start to understand how the regulations apply. So there's a bit of everyone feeling each other out to see how things will work, but I think over the next few months there'll be a better understanding of that.
Yeah, awesome. And less time for you in VCAT by the sounds.
I think so. Yeah. Look, in theory there should be less because there's more certainty up front.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understand.
There'll still be a lot. VCAT is a number of different matters that goes through for larger buildings, a lot of other items. But your traditional 2 and 3 townhouse development, if you're a developer, you should be able to be looking to design it in a way where you don't have to go to VCAT.
Yep.
And I don't think any developer's ever designed it wanting to go to VCAT, but it's certainly something that the ability to avoid that has the ability to probably save a good 18 months sometimes in terms of process.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe as a broad guideline, if we do have a standard townhouse development on a 650 square block, roughly what sort of time do you expect the council to take on something like that?
From the day you lodge to the day in which you get your decision, I'd be still allowing 6 months. Now, I think that will probably improve as, again, councils and ourselves understand the process better and what sort of things are required. But I'd be allowing 6 months as a guide.
As a continuous.
And hoping that it's less than that. And I think eventually it will get less. Yeah. But I think you also probably need to factor in that there'll be some elements at the front end that'll take longer, in that we'll be encouraging people to provide the right level of documentation up front, rather than just say quickly putting in an application and waiting for council to write you a further information letter. Get all your information up front, knowing that you've ticked the boxes and that you can go to council with some certainty and some confidence that you've met these requirements and expect to go straight through.
I guess from a developer, if you're doing projects on and on, you're almost going to come up with a bit of a blueprint for a couple of designs or styles or strategies in certain areas. And once you might have to spend a bit more time in that up front with your designer and your town planner.
Yeah.
But from there, you might actually be able to get it into council a bit quicker.
And I think some of those more volume builders that have had standard designs, that the risk always there was that council might start tweaking them to a point where it was no longer in their standard range. I think there'll be the ability to find the right block free of overlays where you can go to a volume builder or those builders that have a standard template, and you should be able to work out pretty quickly if you can or can't do that.
Yeah.
And if you can, that's great from a building construction cost point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's great. So this has been awesome, Dan. Sounds like in a month or two we'll be talking about the single knockdown rebuild, and maybe we'll get you back for that.
Love to.
But I think just wrapping it up, like you said, just have more confidence, and be more confident that you can get what you want, and maybe even get a little bit more and a cherry on top. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think you'll need to put the work in, but I think that the incentive is there to put that work in and get that type of outcome. And I think that's going to be very desirable to a lot of developers who can really control their timeframes. And I think that's got to be a good thing for everybody, doesn't it? Yeah.
No, 100%, Dan. Yeah. Well done, Gav.
Great, yep.
You could probably sit here all day, but we do need to wrap it up.
Yeah, we do. No, great insights.
Thanks, guys.
Food for thought.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Dan Bowden from Song Bowden Planners. Thanks so much for that. We'll see you soon. Anyone who's got any questions, make sure you drop them in the comments below. I'll get back to Dan and make sure we can get those answered. But ripper episode there. Anyone that's going to get value out of that, please like, share, subscribe. Get across to the Little Fish Network. We'll be giving more updates in there as Dan drips them out to us. And that's it, guys. You're doing knockdown rebuild, dual occupancy or multi-development townhouse. Make sure you book a consultation and chat with me anytime soon. Happy developing.